Hey there, good morning. Great to be with you. If you would, open up a Bible with me to Mark chapter 8 this morning. We're going to continue in our Jesus is King series. We're going to be picking up in Mark chapter 8 in verse 22. For multiple reasons, I'm not really a basketball guy. I'm sure you could just guess that by looking at me, which is kind of rude, by the way. But I'm aware that I'm a very short man. I'm 5'7", if you're wondering. There are some who are shorter, but I'm short. But I've tried, and I just can't play the game. I can barely even dribble. However, I don't know if you've seen the most recent Last Dance documentary series on Netflix, but it's fantastic. If you don't know about it, The Last Dance is all about the life and career of Michael Jordan with the late 90s Chicago Bulls. And it's actually kind of centered around his last season with the Bulls. But just witnessing someone like him with such drive and determination, it's incredible to watch. Jordan is just a dream. He's so stylish while playing basketball. I don't know how he did it. But something that was really interesting to me, has been interesting to me as we've been watching, is to be transported back into a time before people really realized that Michael Jordan was to be the greatest of all time. It's just funny to see footage of people and coaches and crowds witnessing the early days of Jordan. And you can tell that they recognize he's a good player, but they don't necessarily realize that they're in the midst of such greatness. Like that what they're witnessing is something that will shape the world of basketball forever. I'm watching and I just want to say to everyone on the screen, do you realize who and what you're witnessing? Like, this is Michael Jordan. And all these years later, it's really easy for all of us to look back and recognize the greatness. It's easy to look back and see, yeah, Jordan, no one compares to him. And I know some sort of disagree with that, maybe LeBron or Steph Curry or something. But it's easy for us now to look back and see such greatness. But it's not always easy in the moment to recognize what you're witnessing. And today, as we read another story of Jesus from the Gospel of Mark, I want you to try and place yourself in the disciples' shoes. They are witnessing greatness, but do they recognize it? Can they really see what is happening right before their eyes? Is it possible that they won't really understand until much later in their life, once Jesus isn't even physically with them, who they were in the presence of? I want us to imagine, what if all you knew of Jesus was from the first 7 chapters of Mark, which we've read so far? You had heard his incredible teaching. You had witnessed the otherworldly miracles of healing and him even raising from the dead. But oftentimes, we modern readers, we jump so quickly to talking about Jesus as Messiah or King, which the Gospel of Mark will take us there. Mark believes that and he will claim that. But what if you were a disciple walking there with Jesus and you had witnessed all that he had been saying and doing so far in Mark? Who would you think that Jesus was in that moment? If you didn't already know the end of the story, if you didn't already know like what we know, Jesus as Messiah, Jesus as King, who would you think that he was? Who is this man that is doing all these things? Again, it's so easy for us to look back and recognize greatness. And by the way, it's also easy to look back with judgment on characters from history, and especially characters from the scriptures. We think, of course, if I were walking with Jesus, I would understand everything. I would get all of what Jesus was trying to get me to understand. Would you really, though? Who is Jesus? This is the narrative arc that Mark is leading us towards. Mark 8 really is a climactic mountaintop moment in this story of the Gospel of Mark. If this were a film, we really would be on the edge of our seat at this moment. Who is this man? Who do we think that he is? We're waiting for the truth to be unveiled. And so take a look with me, Mark chapter 8, starting in verse 22. And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not enter even the village." This healing story and the story that follows, which we'll read here in just a moment, these two paragraphs, these two stories are linked together. This is how Mark intentionally lays out these stories. It may not be immediately obvious to us modern readers, but Mark ties these stories together to make a point for us. And I want to point out that this healing story is actually kind of strange for one main reason, and it's this. It seems like Jesus has to try twice to heal this man, as if Jesus' first attempt wasn't really good enough, and that would be strange, wouldn't it? It says this, again, look at this. It says, Jesus laid his hands on the blind man, and he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And the blind man looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." That may sound mysterious, like something for us to decode. No, it's translation. It's pretty simple. My vision is still pretty blurry. If you're looking out and people are saying, "Hey, what do you see?" and you see humans, but they look like trees walking, it means you can't see very well. And so Jesus then placed his hands on the man one more time, on his eyes, and he says to the man again, it says that the man again opened his eyes, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. In other parts of Mark, Jesus performs what would be more difficult healings. This is not like this should be a walk in the park for Jesus to heal a blind man. Jesus has that on lockdown at this point. The point of this miracle isn't that Jesus kind of failed or flubbed up his first attempt. Rather, Mark is showing us that there is a process of having things revealed to us. There's a process of illumination. This is the point of what's happening here. There is a process of going from blind to full sight, especially when it comes to understanding who Jesus is. The story in the paragraph actually that comes right before this represents this really well, where Jesus says to his disciples in verse 17, still chapter 8, he says, "Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not yet see?" This whole section just is so much about vision, going from blindness to full sight, going from seeing in a blurry vision to full illumination. It's not always immediate to go from blindness to seeing everything clearly. Mark wants us to understand that there is, again, a process of illumination. Jesus doesn't fail with his first attempt at healing here. Mark is showing us that this blind man is struggling in his process to come out of his own blurriness of vision into a clear and perfect vision. And isn't this such a common human reality? We humans are so often slow on the uptake of what is real and true. We don't perceive truth quickly. We perceive it slowly. Our vision is like a slow analog filter. We're not digital, we're analog. I mean, we're like something from the 1980s, not something from 2020. And so Jesus is the one who has to help maybe a second or a third or a fourth time, laying his hands on us, applying a healing and restoration to our blurriness of vision. There's a process to illumination and revelation. I think you might be following me at this point. Let's continue. Look at verse 27. It says this. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And the disciples, they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. Do you see some of the process of illumination happening right here? Jesus asks, who are people saying that I am? And the disciples tell him that some people are saying that he's like John the Baptist. Some people are saying that he's like Elijah. Some people are saying that he's one of the prophets. So let's think about that for a moment. This really is interesting because it actually totally destroys the often thought of image of Jesus just constantly holding and petting a lamb, the never engaging in confrontation, the soft-spoken and very mild kind of Jesus. Most people in that day were actually experiencing Jesus like a prophet, like Elijah, John the Baptist, one of the prophets. Those kind of people, their job was to regularly call out people for their injustice. A prophet was to speak boldly against evil and oppression, even if them speaking out was incredibly unpopular. Usually people were very on the fence about whether they even liked the prophet at all. Prophets were stoned and killed in the Old Testament. People often despised them. The prophet usually was telling most people, "You're all wrong. You need to turn from your wickedness and turn back to God." In reality, a lot of people hated prophets and wanted to see them vanished, killed, for them to be deleted from their culture. And so this is how people were somewhat seeing Jesus. This is interesting. This is what people saw of in Jesus. He's another prophet. But I love this. Jesus nudges his disciples a little further. He presses them towards a deeper revelation of who he is. Jesus says, "But who do you say that I am?" I know that may be what everyone else thinks of, or that's how they're seeing me so far. But what about you? And here is our climactic narrative moment. I can see Peter. I imagine him leaning in, almost maybe nervous to get the answer wrong. Jesus has asked me, "Who do I see him to be?" And Peter says, "Jesus, you are the Christ." Peter goes from a blurry vision of Jesus to a more clear and illuminated vision of who Jesus is in this moment. And you would imagine that Jesus would like shout for joy, "Peter, you got it right." It's like Peter has finally come to a vista that looks out and shows him more than he's ever been able to see along this journey so far. Jesus, you are the Christ. Jesus, you are the King that we've been waiting for. And it's just so interesting because Jesus then just tells all of the disciples, okay, don't tell anyone about this. Kind of a twist, if you will, maybe in the narrative. I would expect Jesus maybe to say something different in that moment. Good job. You've got it, Peter. I mean, just for a hypothesis here, I mean, is it possible that it's because Jesus knows there's still much more to be revealed to Peter? Much more to be revealed to all of the disciples about who Jesus truly is. Yes, Peter's getting it right, but has he got full illumination, full revelation at this point? So what does it mean that Peter understood Jesus to be Christ in this moment? For Peter, this meant that Jesus was far more than just a prophet. Jesus was a prophet. He displays incredible teaching ability. He had powerful things to say. His critique of the injustice of the time was sharp and it was needed. And it cut through the noise of that time, which is incredible. We need that Jesus today. Jesus is a prophet. But Peter is saying here, you are more than just a prophet. Peter knew in his heart that Jesus was the king that they had been waiting for. He was the king that would finally make the right decisions. The king who would finally understand what real justice was supposed to look like. And this king would not only preach and teach about a society and a culture and a people that carries perfect justice and mercy and love. This king would not only preach and teach about these things, but this king would have the power to enact and bring about such a society. This king would have the power to actually make all of that dream into a reality. Peter looked at Jesus and thought, you're the one. Things have been bad for so long, Jesus, and I think you're the one who has finally come to set it all straight, to bring the unity and the peace and the justice and the love, and to remove the hand of oppression from our world. Those of us who have been around the Bible for a while, we tend to just always jump so quickly to just seeing Jesus as a forgiver of sins. Jesus is that. Like, don't mishear me or misunderstand me. We can't miss that Jesus paid for our sins upon the cross. That he paid the debt that none of us could pay so that we could be connected and redeemed to God in a relationship. That is Jesus, absolutely. But those of us who, especially Christian culture, those of us been in the Bible for much of our life, we quickly turn everything into that, and we tend to miss so many other things about Jesus. Jesus is also the King who has come to restore and bring the perfect kingdom, the perfect society. Jesus is King. Jesus is the Christ. N.T. Wright, New Testament scholar, he says this about Mark 8. Who do we say that Jesus is? Would we like to think of him as simply a great human teacher? Or would we prefer him as a superhuman figure who is able to zap all the world's problems into shape? Which, quote aside for a moment, wouldn't that be easy? If we could just do nothing, pray 0 prayers, and stand at a distance from all of the problems of the world while God just fixed everything? But unfortunately, that's not the kind of relationship or posture or attitude that God invites us into. Like, not at all. Continuing with N.T. Wright's quote. Are we prepared to have the easy answers of our culture challenged by the actual Jesus, by his redefined notion of messiahship, and by the call, which is coming up in the next section of Mark 8, to follow him in his risky vocation. I love that. Are we going to allow ourselves to be challenged to follow Jesus in his risky vocation? The truth is that Mark is directing this same question that Jesus asks of his disciples. Mark is redirecting that question towards us. You've experienced and seen so many things from Jesus. You have felt care and compassion. Maybe you have been awed by Jesus' wisdom and his truth. Who do you say that Jesus is? Who is Jesus to you? And so this is my question as we end our morning together. Who has Jesus been to you in your life so far? A few options to consider for how you might be viewing your relationship to Jesus. Listen to these few options. Is Jesus only a comforter and encourager to you? Do you ever allow Jesus to also challenge you and even correct you? Or is your relationship to Jesus such that you only imagine that he's always correcting you and disappointed in you? Well, maybe you should consider his unwavering, relentless love and acceptance of you. You see, there's different people within our community, and we tend to think so differently about our relationship to Jesus. Some of us need grace to be something that we add more into the recipe. Some of us need justice. We need to apply Jesus's ideals and his vision for human flourishing and morality. Like some of us need to be challenged by the way that Jesus presents a beautiful moral vision for our world. Continue. Another option to consider for how you might be viewing your relationship to Jesus. Is your relationship to Jesus intimate, like a friendship? Or is it only something that you think of as distant and far off? Jesus is way out there and you're down here, and that's how you kind of intend to keep it. Well, for you, the scriptures really emphasize that the intention of Christ is that he would know you, that you would know him, and that your relationship would be deep and profound, that you would be like a sheep that knows the voice of their shepherd. That you, as you do your life and your day, you know, oh, that's the Spirit of Jesus talking to me. And as you hear that voice, you respond and you move. Do you have an intimate friendship, relationship with Jesus? Lastly, is Jesus your King? Have you given Jesus authority to speak over your life, about your decisions, about your morality? Or is he only allowed into certain tiny little parts of your life and your decisions and all of that? Who do you say that Jesus is?